Hi, I'm Amanda. I'm with Soil Harmonics, and I offer education to people who want to build ecosystems. I had a huge inspiration to create this educational video a few weeks ago when I was working on an organic farm, doing a maintenance day, and I was asked to go into the garden and pull weeds from a berm to clear space to plant some other things. So this garden was already growing things like trees and artichokes, and they wanted to place something else into this berm. And we were in some plant life much like what is here. There were tall grasses, plantains, there were some thistles in there too, but not like what is here. But this is very representative of what we were pulling from the berm. So I began to work on it, and I realized I wasn't making a whole lot of progress because I kept pulling the grasses out of the ground and knocking all of the soil off of it so I could keep all of that nice, juicy, yummy life in the ground. And I looked around, and everybody else around me was piling all of their grasses, and somebody was coming along with a wheelbarrow and taking it away, and they were moving really quickly and just taking cupfuls of soil along with the root zone that was accompanying the weeds. And I began to have an issue with that, and I thought to myself, wow, I've always remembered that a bare soil is a dead soil, and once you take all of that juicy life out of there, you are taking some productivity out of the ground, and it makes it harder to grow something else there later. So on things like those grasses and plantains, you have a lot of bacterial life in the soil and around the roots, and those plants are very well supported by that bacteria. So there is a process of the life forms above and below the ground moving into higher forms of life, and that is true for the plants and the soil microbes, and that is called succession.
Succession is the change in the variety of plants, as well as the predominant plant species over time. In nature, this time can be relatively short, as in the decades required for forests to recover after a fire. It can also be long after a mass extinction and take millions of years. Either way, it's a long time in human years. In the beginning, the plant village is a small variety of simple plant species and progresses into more and more complexity. The beginning of succession is always an abundance of things we like to call weeds, except they aren't. There are things like dandelions, a bee's first taste of yummy pollen in the spring, mallow, a broadleaf plant that is the soil's first responder to the budding microbial world needed for continued succession, and some grasses and other flowering plants. These plants are called annuals. They live for one season, make millions of seeds, die, and leave their unsprouted offspring everywhere. After a couple of seasons of this, the soil has grown rich enough to support biennial plants and grasses. These live 2 years and create the environment for perennial shrubs and herbs to thrive. This shift from so-called weeds to perennial plants that live for several seasons takes about 15 years, somewhere between 10 and 15 years on the succession timeline. Pines will replace the shrubs, and young oak trees appear. Way down the line, at 50 to 75 years, the oaks will mature, and the pines will die off. In this example, oaks become what we call old-growth forest, and can sustain for hundreds of years.
Okay, so now that you've seen what succession looks like in sort of a classroom education type of setting, I wanted to show you what it looks like for reals in nature and how she does it. And it is not linear. Everything is intermingled with everybody else. So what we're looking at here is the beginnings of first order of succession with some horsetails. There's some kind of vining thing with some poison oak growing up out of it. There's some poison hemlock back over there. And please take note that there's also a few redwood trees growing here. And I'm going to point out that those actually don't necessarily belong in first succession area, and we'll talk about why those are here. But as we pan up, you can see we have a nice sycamore growing here. This is a late order succession type of tree. And as we come across the road on this lovely organic farm owned by a friend of mine, you'll see that there is an oak tree down here on the other side of the road. So these trees are the last order of succession. So everything is intermingled here within, just a few dozen feet of one another. And this is how nature does things, and things can change rapidly depending on how you handle the plants that are here. And this land is definitely being stewarded by the owner of this property. Here's that redwood again that is in the first order of succession zone. And I wanted to mention, as far as the stewarding, what's happening here is these didn't just pop up on their own. The person who owns this land is actually planting them, and he has been planting redwoods on his property for probably 20 years now. So there are several here, and this is one of the smaller ones. And there are some that are even smaller than this, and some that are quite a bit larger than this. So what's happening here is help with succession, and the owner here is actually lending a hand with creating old growth forest on his farm. In order to have success growing trees, succession of plants needs to be allowed to happen. That's why they call it succession. Tearing out all the weeds and grasses and then leaving a bare soil is like trying to cook soup for a couple of hours with no ingredients. I've been slaving over a hot stove for you for 2 hours. Don't you like it? Do you think this is how Mother Earth does it?
No, she doesn't. Here's how I do it.
So what's so great about weeds? Well, here we have a first succession plant that's a grass. And as you can see, you've got all of the roots coming out here, and of course all of the green stuff growing up here. And the remarkable thing about the weed is not really the plant itself, but it's the area around the root zone that expands out just a few millimeters. And this magical zone is called the rhizosphere. All the rest of the soil in the ground that doesn't have roots in it is called bulk soil. So there are two things that if I hadn't pulled this plant out of the ground that it would be doing right now. The first one is it would be transpiring. That is, it would be pulling water up out of the bulk soil into the root zone, into the rhizosphere, and up through the plant and then out. And when it does that, it draws bacteria up from the bulk soil into this root zone, into the rhizosphere, and it concentrates it there. The other thing that it's doing is it's receiving carbon dioxide from the atmosphere, and that comes into the plant, and the plant makes happy, fun sugar snacks out of it that are exuded out of the roots. And these are, of course, called exudates. And this is bacteria food, and the bacteria really, really love this stuff. So they multiply, they grow, and they multiply many, many magnitudes greater than what you would find in the bulk soil. So those are two of the things that are happening with the rhizosphere and the plant. So the next thing that happens in this zone is that the bacteria will begin to die off. And when they do that, their little bodies become a nitrogen source for the plant. And they also are food for other types of soil life, like protozoa. These protozoa eat the bacteria. Bacteria have a greater nitrogen concentration in their bodies than protozoa need. So when protozoa excrete their waste, they're putting nitrogen into the soil and it becomes food for the plant. So basically what you have happening here is this whole magical symbiotic relationship that puts the ingredients into this magical soup of life that was missing from Beth's hot water soup. So that's the miracle that happens when the plant and the soil life begin to work together. And if you go and you pull out that entire meadow of weeds to replace a higher up successional plant like a tree, then you are basically ripping out the heart of the soil like the evil queen tearing the heart out of a human being. Oh my gosh, don't do that. There's good news though for stewards of the land. You can make succession move along a lot faster. Instead of clearing all the weeds, go ahead and just clear the area where you'd like to plant. Say you would like to plant a shrub, something like a sage. These are perennial plants, so they will continue to grow and bloom and reseed themselves year after year after year. Once you dig your hole, go ahead and throw in some compost. You're going to want to use compost that has some good beneficial fungi in it. Plants that are perennial really love fungi. Of course, also put a good amount of water at the bottom of that hole. You're going to want to hydrate that plant really well because it may have been stressed out a little bit from the transplanting process. Then there's mulch. Mulch is super awesome. For a shrub, you need to use wood chips, but don't use the decorative ones that are used in landscaping. Those are often stained and they are bad for your plant and bad for the soil life. The wood chips, though, that are clean are really awesome fungal food, and that is something that your perennial shrub is going to need. So say you want flowers instead. Just chop the weeds down and leave them on top of the ground and leave the roots in the ground. Then go ahead and plant your flowers. This green weed mulch is really great bacteria food, and annual flowers really love bacteria. If you do all of these things, you're going to be well on your way to keeping all of that juicy soil life in your yard, and you will get the kind of landscaping that you want much faster. If you'd like to understand why shrubs like fungi and flowers like bacteria, stay tuned for next time when we talk about the exciting world of life in the soil.